Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you. Featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Today I'm very pleased to have Sandra Cooze, who is a holistic trauma coach and owner of Rise Above Your Story, a holistic business focused on transformational trauma healing. Her passion and her dedication for trauma healing was born out of the result of her own traumatic past. Molested as a child, unfortunately sexually assaulted, and raped as a young adult, Sandra felt lost for many years until she found peace and purpose in spirituality. She's done so many different things like Reiki and healing modalities and was fully able to fully transform and heal her own emotional pain. I want to talk all about what you went through, Sandra, and a lot of the inspiration that is going to come through you to other people is going to really be an asset. So let's just start the show, and I want to say again, welcome to the Susan Brender Show, Sandra Cooze.
Thank you so much for having me, Susan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm delighted that you're here. Now, Sandra, let's begin to understand the effects of trauma on people. You know, a lot of our soldiers come back with PTSD, and it's been a horrible, horrible thing for so many different years, and people don't understand what it means to have PTSD. I want you to tell people what it was like and how you actually were able to get through it.
Well, PTSD is very common, not only in soldiers, but in any trauma survivors. In essence, PTSD means that the rug has been pulled from under our feet, and we are in constant defense and hide and flight mode. So as soon as a situation comes up that reminds us of something that happened in the past, we get panic attacks, we get anxiety, and this is a form of PTSD.
Wow. Now, when you mention that you get these anxiety attacks, when you started as a young person experiencing all these horrendous things to yourself, were you able to cope at all? And if you were, was there somebody who got you through it?
Well, I have to say I was lucky that my parents believed me when I told them that I was molested. Not every child has that, unfortunately. But other than telling me don't go there anymore and take me out of the equation, they couldn't offer me much because they were overwhelmed. They did not know what to do. So, no, I was pretty left alone with it. Wow. And for a while, I actually did forget. I guess that's what my parents hoped would happen, that I would forget what happened, which never works.
You suppressed it, is what you're saying? You said to yourself, or maybe you didn't even say it to yourself, but it just happened, that you, instead of really dealing with it and getting it out, which causes, you to get past anxiety and depression, you really suppressed it and you kept it inside, which is a very negative thing because it causes depression and anxiety. What was your story? I would like the audience to understand your story because I think once they know that, they'll be able to understand what to do about it. Parents who are listening to this or various other people who deal with this. So, Sandra, please give the audience a little story from the beginning of what happened to you.
Sure. When I was 12 years old, I had the opportunity to take care of a pony. Now, I loved horses. I loved being around horses. And even though we didn't have enough money that I could have my own horse, my mom had this opportunity from a friend to take care of a pony. And the stable master was a man in his 60s, and he promised my mom he would take care of me, that nothing would happen, that I wouldn't get kicked by a horse, and so on and so forth. And one day, he offered me to take a ride on his horse. He had a beautiful, big, golden mare. And, yeah, so of course I was excited because I love big horses. So we went on this trip. He was guiding the horse, and I was in a saddle. And after walking a bit through fields, we came by a shed, and he said, well, I only have to go and get something inside. So he took me off the horse and said he wanted to give the horse a rest because it was so warm. It was summer. So without questioning, I went inside with him, and I don't remember much of the interior. I just remember there was a bed with a rugged blanket, and he asked me to sit down over there while he was doing something else in the shed, and then he came over, sat beside me, and molested me.
Oh, God. You know, as I listen to you telling this story, Sandra, it just creates anxiety for me because so many people are vulnerable to these kinds of things. I mean, you think somebody is kind, you think they're nice, and you're 12 years old. What do you know?
And as children, we're being taught to listen to adults. Adults know better, and you should not defy adults as a child. So I think what really needs to happen is for parents to differentiate between adults that do the right thing and adults who do the wrong thing. Because I had no idea what he was doing. I only knew it was wrong because I was too young to understand.
Now, when this occurred, did you go straight to your parents and explain what happened to you, or did you just keep it in?
I did keep it in because I was afraid. I didn't know if I did something wrong. I didn't know what happened. I just knew it was wrong. It didn't feel right. But I did tell a friend who came by that day, and he insisted that I would tell my parents, and he even went with me to my mother and stayed there the whole time. Otherwise, if he weren't there, I probably would have never told her.
Wow.
And who knows what could have happened then.
An unbelievable situation. Now, your story continues, right?
Yes.
You're molested, and then this young man helps you to express it and tell your parents. What happened then?
My mother looked at me and said, don't go there anymore. That was it. But she went with me there to pick up my stuff and everything, and then we really never talked about it again. I had issues for years with that, but now as an adult and being a trauma coach, I understand that she didn't know how to deal with the situation.
Right.
She was overwhelmed, and I understand that.
And probably, and tell me if I'm wrong, because I would imagine if you're a parent who has had a child who's had an experience like this, you kind of feel a little bit guilty because maybe she felt that she could have avoided or helped you avoid it. Am I right about that? Or
yes, most likely. Yes, and that's very common. Right. And this is also why I'm a big advocate about a better curriculum in schools for children about sexual assault and better education for the parents. Because the first few moments when a child is coming to the parent and says, here, this happened to me, this is the most important time where the parent really has to push all their thoughts and all their feelings of guilt and what could have happened, what could I have done, pushed it aside and just be there for the child, as difficult as that is.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. Now, let's kind of move on, because now you're an adult and you're doing some amazing things, and one of the things that you are doing is you've become a trauma coach.
Yes, that's right.
Which I think is wonderful, because needless to say, you've had experiences that you can draw upon and help people to avoid them. So, you know, part of the answer to you say part of the answer is a quote from Oprah. Turn your wounds into wisdom. You apply that, I imagine, to your being a coach, correct?
Yes, this quote inspired me so much, and it really gives me purpose, because it's so deep when you think about it. It's a wonderful quote.
Yeah. I want you to tell the audience a little bit about what a trauma coach actually does and the approach that you take when you work with people.
Okay. Well, first of all, trauma healing is no one-size-fits-all approach. we all experience trauma differently, even though trauma has the same kind of way how it works within ourselves. But it depends on what people are open to. So I offer coaching, of course, which is basically communication therapy with powerful questioning and getting to the blockages and releasing them. Or I offer energy healing through Reiki and crystals. I have done it for many years, very successfully, also in trauma healing. Or guided meditation, mindfulness practices. So it really depends on the person, what they feel drawn to, what they work best with. And that's how I individualize what I do.
Now, I have to be very honest with you. When I hear you talk about some of the things that you use in your coaching, you talk about Reiki, you talk about crystals, you talk about things that are very spiritual. And people don't really understand what Reiki is, and they really question the crystals situation. So you said it's very successful, so I'd like you to explain and give a definition of what Reiki is and how crystals actually work.
Okay. Well, for crystals, I would like to tell a bit about my backstory, because this is a big part of why I work with crystals. So after I was raped with 22, 2 years later, I went to see a psychologist. He listened to me for an hour, looked at me, chuckled, and said, "You probably already worked through all that. What am I supposed to do?" Yes, that was the modern medicine. Yes, so I was devastated because I wanted to change. I didn't feel like myself. So I felt crushed again, left alone with my pain. Now, a little while later, a friend of mine who was very spiritual told me, "Get a quartz crystal already," literally like that. And I had no idea what he was talking about, but I did, as he asked, and he asked me to take it to bed with me and just hold it in my hand when I go to sleep. Within 3 months, I was a different person. I was happier. I was more outgoing. I didn't feel so weighed down by my emotions. So that was, my introduction to spirituality and the beginning of my healing journey.
Again, I listened to you talk about the crystals, and you said it took a few months until you started to sort of awake. I call it the awakening, if you will, to happiness and to a good life. Again, I would love for you to explain a little bit more. Is there any way that you can talk about how crystals actually do that? Because it's a rock. It's a rock. And I guess I'm not alone when I say, gee, how can a rock, and yet I hear people talk about crystals all the time, but these are believers. And there's a lot of people out there who are non-believers, okay?
Yes.
So explain a little bit more about crystals.
Okay. Well, the quartz crystal, for example, you have one in your cell phone. You have one in your TV. You have one in the computer, because the quartz crystal helps with the electricity. So there has been, I read an article a couple years ago about how crystals work with the body, and it was scientific. 2 scientists from Germany were trying to work out how crystals work. So they had a quartz crystal sitting next to the head of a person, and they measured the brain waves of the person, and they saw when the crystal was there, the brain waves changed slightly and became the same frequency as the energy that the crystal emits.
Right.
So it was scientifically tested. And so crystals can have, it sounds strange, I know, but crystals actually have a vibration. And there are different crystals for different issues, and they work with different issues in the body or on the emotional level. And it's truly fascinating.
It is fascinating, and you actually have evidence-based information that proves that crystals do something to the body, and obviously you've experienced it. Now, do you mainly work with people with Reiki or with crystals? And if Reiki is another one, I would like people to understand a little bit more, because it's a very spiritual kind of thing. I've actually had Reiki done on me once, And I remember being, kind of lying down on the table and saying to myself, this is not going to work. This is like absurd. Somebody's putting their hand over your body and they're kind of moving their hand over your body. How could that have an effect on you? And so you have had experiences that it has had an effect on people, but people still don't understand Reiki. So explain it, please.
Okay, so to explain how Reiki works, we have to go a little bit into quantum physics. Basically means everything is energy. We are materialized energy, in essence. So just as we are energy, so we have energy all around us. Now, in Reiki is the belief that when something is out of balance in the body, we can become sick, we can have pain, we can have emotional issues. And with a Reiki treatment, the energy is being brought in balance within your body on all levels. This is in a nutshell. As a Reiki practitioner, I basically guide the energy that's all around me. I don't use my own energy or I would be completely depleted. I use the energy around me, bundle it up, and guide it into the body of my client. And the body of my client knows what to do with this energy. So it works through the body, and I check for hot and cold spots. I can feel that by hovering my hands over, and that's how I know if energy is stuck or if there's possible inflammation, for example, or just energy that needs to be removed.
And of all the people that you ever worked on, who does it kind of affect the most? Does it affect kids? Does it affect adults, men, women? Who kind of gets the best effect out of Reiki?
The best effect is for people who give Reiki the benefit of the doubt. Because when we don't believe in Reiki, for example, and we are sure it's not going to work, we block ourselves. So, of course, it's not going to work because we don't allow it. Can I give you an example of an amazing treatment I had a few years back? I met a woman. She had degenerative disc in her neck and hasn't been able to move her neck in weeks. So she was in a lot of pain, and she saw me at an event I was offering Reiki, and she said, well, I've tried everything else. Why not? She had no idea what Reiki was, never heard of it, but she said, let's try it. I worked on her neck for 5 minutes. I had to stop because she felt too much heat. It was too hot because there was so much energy coming out, and the energy was boiling hot, which is not unusual. Now I stopped because she felt too uncomfortable. I helped her sit up, and I asked her, okay, how do you feel? She turned her head and looked at me and said, I have no pain. That's unusual, but yes,
it's unusual. I'm going to stop you for a second because I love hearing stories where people are helped by things that they may feel negative about or not sure of, and you're kind of explaining, and you're also attributing some of the energy in one's body to the fact that it can kind of help people to overcome some of their problems, a lot of problems. And so when you're working with somebody, just walk me through it for a second because I want people to understand. You've explained a little bit, but I love for them to understand the process by which you actually walk them through coaching, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, first, when I start off with a client, we have, of course, a free consultation. So we can get to know one another, and they can see if they really feel comfortable working with me. Because if they don't feel comfortable with me, it's not going to work. So once we establish that we like to work together, I first start by asking them questions about what happened, so that they can really tell their story. I basically create a safe space, whether it's online or here in my practice room, so they can talk about it. Some people talk about their story for the very first time, and just hearing themselves talk about their trauma can already be a lot of relief, just to voice it. And then we start to talk about what changes they want to have in their lives. Some would like to feel happier. Some want to get rid of the anxiety they feel every time they see or smell a certain thing. As example, it triggers. Some people are triggered by emotions that arise from a certain smell, something someone says, the way someone looks. So it's all part of the trauma. So we work on releasing that through communication, and if they're open to that, through energy work. I do mindfulness. I encourage journaling. I'm a meditation teacher, so I create my own meditations for my clients. And so step by step, we work through releasing the blockages, slowly transform and release the trauma, and I help my clients getting over the limiting beliefs and self-sabotaging behaviors that are caused by the trauma.
Yes. It sounds really fascinating. Now, your company is called Rise Above Your Story, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And why did you choose that particular explanation for your company?
Well, I was actually thinking about that poem from Maya Angelou, I Rise, and that always inspired me. And so I thought, okay, well, trauma is part of your story. And as long as you are encased by it, like the trauma is all around you, there is no way to heal. But if you rise above it, the trauma is beneath you, so you're not encased by it anymore.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, are you interested in writing a book, or do you want to, how would you like to get this story out about what you do and how you've experienced some horrors in your life and how you would love to be able to help people? Is there a way that you want to do it besides doing it in your own practice?
Yes, I actually am working on a book. It's called Journey to Yourself. Basically, the meaning behind that is that if we want to heal, we have to find our way back to ourselves. We have to bring the pieces back together to fully heal, because when we're traumatized, the pieces of ourselves are in shambles. So we bring them back together to be whole again. So rise above, that's why I say Journey to Yourself. Now, this book is twofold. It's first of all my story, and also a lot of information about trauma healing and how we can do it holistically and for ourselves, how we can help ourselves. And the second part is a workbook. It's exercises and suggestions on how to incorporate healing on a daily basis with different approaches.
When do you expect this to come out?
I hope this year. I mean, generally the workbook part is done, but there's constantly new information I get from trauma healing that I just want to add to it to make it as helpful as possible. Right. So I'm hoping that.
And Sandra, your life story as a transformational coach is to help trauma survivors heal and overcome their emotional pain, take back their lives, rise above their stories, and discover who they really, truly are. And that is a tremendous amount of information that I think our audience needs to know, and also I think they have to know how they can get in contact with you, because eventually your book's going to come out. You're going to want them to buy it because you really think it's going to help them, and also you have a business which actually deals with this. So how can our listeners actually contact you?
The easiest way to contact me is through my website, riseaboveyourstory.com. You can also send me an email at sandra@riseaboveyourstory.com, or you can find me on Facebook under the same name. I also have a private Facebook group for trauma survivors who are looking for a safe place to talk about their stories and get some help and guidance and just a sense that they're not alone.
Yeah, and that leads me to one last question before we end the show, and that is, has there been any particular person whose story has stood out? And if so, I'd like you to explain it and how you help them and make the audience really understand that Sandra Cooze is an amazing life story transformational coach.
Well, I have been, a lot of people don't understand is that even if you think you are not traumatized, sometimes issues arise that point to trauma in the childhood. So I had this client, and he came to me for spiritual development. He wanted to learn about spirituality, and because he had many spiritual experiences he couldn't understand. And the more we talked, the more his limiting beliefs and self-sabotaging behaviors came out. And as we talked even more, he realized that he had been traumatized as a child. And this brought a profound change for him. Everything he felt, everything he thought he had experienced suddenly had whole new meaning, and he could really start his healing. This was incredible.
I hear you. Well, today my guest has been Sandra Cooze, a transformation coach. She helps trauma survivors heal and overcome their emotional pain, take back their lives, rise above their stories, and discover who they truly are. And if you want to get in touch with her, her website is www.riseaboveyourstory.com. And if you want to get in touch with her again, Sandra at riseaboveyourstory.com. And I want to thank you, Sandra Cooze, for being on the Susan Brender Show. I think a lot of people will find this story very interesting, and not only interesting, but they can get a lot out of it. And if they need to get in touch with somebody like you, they know how to do it now. So thank you again for being on the Susan Brender Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to The Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.